did I notice I was wearing a spooky shirt and decided to put on black lipstick? Yes. Yes, I did. And we're just gonna lay into these vibes. It is, you know, the official start to spooky season. 4th of July is over. Let's lean into it a little bit. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and this is the Astral Library. And I have another guide video for you guys today. This is a little series I'm doing. I'm calling it Guide to Whatever, where I'm giving you guys some books to get into if you're not into certain genres. The genre for today's video is fantasy books. So I have a stack of fantasy books just off camera here where I've tried to curate a few picks for you guys to kind of dip your toes into fantasy if that's not a genre you're like super familiar with, or one you've just been looking for some recommendations to get more into. So just like for my graphic novels video, I tried to break these down into categories to kind of give you more of a sense of like what you should kind of lean into. So let's go ahead and just dive straight in. Now, the very first category I have for you is short and sweet and a standalone. Oftentimes fantasy includes these long epic stories and these long complicated worlds that can be really intimidating for readers who are maybe not used to that genre or are just kind of overwhelmed with the thought of starting a series that is maybe 7, 5, 6 books long. So I wanted to start off with something easy, something short, sweet, and fun that you can read in a day if you had the time. You're not too worried about this expansive world, but it still kind of hits those fantasy tropes and gives you good times all around. And for that, I have So This Is Ever After by F.T. Lucan. So this is a standalone fantasy novel where we are following a adventuring party who was set to rescue a princess, and we are following them at the very end of that journey where they're rescuing the princess only to find out that she has in fact died before they got there. And now they are left trying to figure out what to do with their kingdom, as well as trying to figure out a curse that has been laid upon the throne, which one of the party members sit on. And now our leader Eric must figure out how to break this curse that says by the time he turns 18, he must choose a soulmate, and the only people around are his friends. So this is a short and sweet story where we get to follow our character kind of like shenanigans himself into a romance. Otherwise, he is going to have some very serious consequences. We have all the familiar fantasy tropes, all the familiar fantasy classes. So we have mage, we have warriors, we have a castle, we had a princess, and we have a magical curse. This was a really, really fun read. Again, it's not too long. It's only 340 pages, so really quick and easy to read in a single day if you want to do a single sitting, and it's just a really fun time. But also I think it's just a really good way to dip your toe into fantasy and to kind of get used to some of the mechanics that go along in that world in a way that is very reminiscent of other genres like contemporary romance. So the next category, I didn't quite know how to label this. In one part, it is fantasy romance, which is really, really popular at this moment of time. Everyone really wants to get into it, but I also wanted to give you guys something that has a really large fan base. So something that you could pick up in fantasy and there'd be a lot of people to talk to about, because honestly that's one of the best things about reading is getting to engage with other people who've read the book and to have conversations with it. And this is a book that, love it or hate it, is super popular right now and is a really fun story. And that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I know, you've probably heard this book. You probably have friends who read it. Like her or not, Sarah J. Maas is a big name in the industry and she has really fun stories. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they are fun, and like I said, they are very, very popular right now, and they can give you a really kind of common ground with a lot of different type of people, especially since this book has gained a lot more popularity in recent years due to the lockdown and just people getting more back into reading. And a lot of people have cited A Court of Thorns and Roses as the main reason they got back into reading. So yes, I'm going to include it on this list. It's not the most original, but it is also one of the more fun books and will really give you that community if you're looking to kind of get into reading and getting into talking about reading. So this is a completed series with a ongoing spin-off series. So we are following our main character, Feyre, who kind of ends up in this bargain with a Fey Lord. It's very much a kind of Beauty and the Beast retelling. I cannot say too much about this book, just in that it's a very complex series. Sarah J. Maas does a really good job of like creating these like bigger worlds that are very like deceptive in the first book, and she's known for having red herrings. I would like to put a disclaimer out here. If you pick up this book and you read it and you hate it, you still have to read the second book, because the setup for this book is a red herring. It is not exactly all that it seems, and the second book is one of my favorite books that Sarah J. Maas has written, period. So I introduced that this little caveat. But yes, it's a very, very fun series. It's, again, not a perfect series, but it is something easy to read and easy to kind of like turn your mind off and enjoy. It's got epic romance. We got some political intrigue going on. We got some cool magic going on. We got some very cool places and characters and side characters. 100%. I highly, highly recommend this if you're really looking to get into fantasy and you're kind of unsure where to go and like where to start. Start with what's popular, because even if you don't like it, you at least have something to talk to other people about and to kind of give you a guideline of where do you want to go in terms of like other fantasy. Maybe you don't enjoy something that's going on, but maybe people who have read this book, to which there is a lot, can then guide you to something that they like maybe more than this. Okay, the next category I have is superheroes. I never quite know where to put superheroes in terms of like categories. Do they have their own category? Are they fantasy? Are they sci-fi? I'm gonna throw it out here because they could be considered fantasy in some elements, and honestly, I think this is a great series. And if you're looking to get into fantasy books or like fantastical element books, and you're like a Marvel fan, and it is another completed series, and that is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. So Marissa Meyer is a well-known author who actually wrote the Lunar Chronicles, which is one of my favorite sci-fi series, period. And in this one, she is tackling superheroes. Particularly, we are looking at the dichotomy between hero and villain in a society where heroes have become essentially the police force. We are following a villain who is forced underground by those heroes and whose entire life has been destroyed by them. And so we are following our main character, Nova, as she's trying to sneak into the heroes' headquarters and integrate herself among them to act as a spy for the villains. I adored this book so much. I adored this entire series. It's only 3 books long. It's got some great covers to them, and the story was really, really interesting because it was really begging the question of what makes a hero or a villain, and what happens when you have a society that is over-reliant on heroes rather than doing anything for themselves. And what does that do to the structure of societies and independence, and for people who get labeled a villain? I flew through this book. I picked this book up on a whim. I was unsure if I was actually gonna like it because superhero stories aren't always my thing. I don't always enjoy them. I like superhero movies, but books, I tend to get bored. This one held my attention start to finish. I flew through all 3 books, and it was just such a great time. Even now, I still think about the series very, very often, and just the kind of questions they pose about the structures of society and the kind of definitions we apply to hero and villain, like what counts as a hero or a villain, or even a heroic or villainous deed. Very, very interesting. I think this is definitely her least talk about series, and I think that's such a shame because it's one of her best. Okay, so the next category I have is fantasy that is set in our world and dealing with like real world issues, and the book I have for this is one of my all-time favorite current series. So while I try to keep this list to series that are either mostly completed, fully completed, or are standalones, this is a book that is part of an ongoing series of which there's 2 books out, and the 3rd book has just been announced to be released, I believe, next January. So it's not complete, but even so, it's a series I think you should really, really read if you want to get into fantasy, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I love this book so much. It is such a great series. So we are following our main character, Bree, who unfortunately has just lost her mother right before she's about to start an advanced high school program that is going to allow her to stay and study at a prestigious university. However, on Bree's first night at the university, she is attacked by a supernatural creature. And as she's trying to run away, she encounters a secret society whose whole job is to fight against these dark beings. Moreover, the people involved in this organization, Bree recognizes from the hospital in which her mother had died at. So there is some sort of connection between this new secret society and her mother's death, and Bree is desperate to get to the bottom of it as she starts incorporating herself into this secret society, which turns out to be the reincarnation of the Arthurian Round Table. And so now Bree must integrate herself with the Knights of the Round Table while also trying to figure out how she's connected to these dark supernatural beings. When I tell you that I had zero desire to read this book, and then I picked it up and fell in love the very first page. Bree is such a great main character, and the premise of this story is really, really well done and really interesting and engaging. Especially because Tracy Deonn does such a great job of not only just having a Black female lead character, which we need more of, but also that deals with really real issues of Black experience in this book, especially in a white-dominated academia space, in addition to the general Black experience a woman of color faces in society, period. It's so good. It's heart-wrenching. It's infuriating to read at times, but it was so good. And the sequel was even better. Oh, there's so many things I wish I could tell you about this series, but it would spoil things that go on. Oh, but it's so good. It's so good. And everyone I've recommended this book to has also equally been obsessed with it. So yeah, pick it up. The next category I have is for the person who is interested in the classics, whether that be classic literature or even just the literary classics, particularly like Greek mythology. So if you were like a Percy Jackson fan growing up, you might really enjoy this book. And that is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So this is the anniversary edition. I will throw up the original cover on screen so that it's maybe a little easier to find. Oh my god. Song of Achilles. Another beloved book here on BookTube, Book Talk, Books, Instagram, all of those things. Everyone agrees that Song of Achilles is an amazing read, and Madeline Miller in general is just an amazing author who really does a great job of taking these very classical tales and bringing them to a more modern audience while still retaining that kind of fantastical element of the original myth. So in particular, we are following the tragic love story between Achilles and his best friend Patroclus, who we get to see their epic love story develop. This is such a heart-wrenching tale as we not only follow the beginning of this relationship, but we also follow it until its tragic end in the Trojan War. It's kind of the point of this whole story. It is a tragic love story in every sense of the word. The thing about this book is that it makes everyone cry in the last few pages, as it should. It's heartbreaking, but it's so worth the journey, and Madeline Miller's writing is so engaging. I don't want to say it has like an unhappy ending. It does, but it doesn't. But it is an epic love story, and there's a reason why this book is so beloved, not only because of its beautiful writing, but just in the way that it depicts this like really beautiful relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. Additionally, it does a really great job of, again, bringing that very classical tale into a more modern sense for people to enjoy. Not that this is a modernized story of Achilles and Patroclus. This is very much set in the time period, but the updated writing and the lyrical prose is enough to kind of connect a modern audience to what it would have been like to experience the original classic tale in that time period, I think. Or at least in my opinion. Okay, this would not be my channel or a recommendation video if I didn't throw something in about Dungeons and Dragons. So the next category is most like Dungeons and Dragons, and while this could also work for the So This Is Ever After, the most D&D fantasy book I've ever read was actually Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. So this is a part of a connected series, but King of the Wilds in itself is a fully completed story that if you only read this first book, I think you would still be fine without having to go on and read the rest. A great standalone, something that's thick enough to kind of like get you into the world, get you introduced to all the magic, while also not being super duper long that kind of is intimidating. So King of the Wilds is following a retired adventuring party who has long since hung up their weapons and shields and is no longer together or even going out on adventures anymore. In particular, we are following our main character, Clay Cooper, who has settled down with a wife and daughter and is kind of just living life. Until one day, one of his old party members comes knocking on his door and begs him to go help rescue his daughter that has been trapped in this enclosed town that is about to be destroyed by monsters. And at first, Clay does not want to go, but when he sees the desperation on his friend's face, he has no choice but to go on this rescue mission, even though it is most likely going to end in their death. And so they decide to get the band back together and go find some monsters in one last adventure. I devoured this book. I read this when I first started grad school again. A little thing about grad school, when you start it, you have no time, okay? You have zero time, you have zero energy, your mind's devoted on how to be a good student, you're so anxious about like impressing your teachers. When I tell you this is the only thing that made me survive those first few months of grad school, okay? Because Nicholas Eames is fucking hilarious. I was laughing out loud while reading this book. And then he had the audacity to also make me tear up about characters. Like, this is supposed to be like, haha, he funny, but then I actually got a really great story and I felt emotional about them and it gave me the perfect ending. Talk about some fucking audacity, right? But Kings in the Wild was that bitch. It did that. And I'm so happy I read it. I ended up I think this is my first 5-star read of that year, and it's held up today. I'm always recommending this book to people, especially if they're a Dungeons and Dragons nerd or if they just really love a great fantasy story, because this gives it all. It gives a D&D vibes, it gives great character vibes, it gives a really good story, a political intrigue, an interesting magical system, interesting villains. But more than that, it is also great to see main characters that are older and going on these quests. Because usually we have these like teenagers that are like in charge of saving the world and in charge of like doing these epic things, which is unrealistic. These are like grown-ass men with families that are going to save the world, and it's so refreshing to see. It really, really is, because it just makes it so much more relatable, especially because they are retired and older, that we see them kind of having to struggle along, where they're realizing that they're not quite as young as they used to be, and they're like aching and groaning and not able to sleep on the floor, which, let me tell you, was so fucking relatable, because I could not be asked to go running 5 miles like I used to when I was younger and had more energy. And this was just a really realistic depiction of that. And it just, again, it gave it that humor while also making these characters very grounded and real. All right, and the very last category I have is kind of going on D&D, but just a more general adventure story. So something that is very high action, very interesting, maybe a little piratey, and that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. Again, this is the special edition I have. I will throw up the original cover right over here for you to kind of get a better idea of like what this book is. This is a book I actually just read this year, and when I say that this was so good, because I listened to this via an audiobook, which highly recommend the audiobook, by the way, and the audiobook, which I normally can never pay attention to, held my attention. In fact, made me sit in the car when I got home to listen to more of the book, okay? It was that good. And Amina is such a great character to tell a story from. So we are following our main character, Amina Al-Sarafi, who was a notorious smuggler and pirate queen and has since retired herself, who is trying to lay low and raise her daughter in a comfortable life. However, one day her past comes knocking on her door and essentially threatens her into going off on a journey to find a kidnapped teenage girl who's been taken by a dark sorcerer. And now Amina must get back her old crew and go to the seas once more, trying to hunt her down while also getting more and more embroiled in a supernatural plot. I had so much fun reading this, not only because Amina is a really, really fun character, but her narration style was just chef's kiss. It was very engaging. It added a lot to the story. It gave the world a lot of perspective and a human touch to it. We also get these like small little bursts of a historical element where we have a historian that is telling us more about the world and telling us more about the lore. And most importantly, this is not a Roman-based fantasy world. We are very much on the high seas in this adventure. A lot of Middle Eastern mythology, which was so much fun and so interesting to read about. Basically, don't see a ton of that in fantasy, and I'm so happy that we're getting more and more authors that are writing in that field. I cannot wait to see more of this series. I will say, this is, of all the books I recommended you, this is the one that is probably the most mean, because it is only the first book in a new series by Shannon Chakraborty. So the next book's not out yet. And trust me, it hurts me as much as it hurts you, but I definitely think that even if you were just to read this as a standalone, I think you would be okay. I think you would want more, because this was amazing. interesting and I found myself wanting more, but I definitely think you could read this as a standalone and still be fine and see if the fantasy genre is for you. But let me tell you, this is something that will convert you. All right, but those are all 6 of my recommendations for you guys on some fantasy books to kind of get you started into the genre if you're new at it. Hello, Editor Emily here, just coming in with one little quick more update before I close out this video. So as of this moment, we have officially decided to do our book club, which is amazing. I'm still working out the name, so that's to be announced sometime, hopefully soon, along with the Discord and an official announcement video. But one thing that is out already for you guys to kind of do and participate in it is I have released a Google form where you guys can submit books for the book club, because I want this definitely to be a community thing where we're reading books everyone's really interested in, things that you guys are interested in that maybe we'll get a chance to pick. So we are doing a mixture of genres, but since fantasy was the runner-up in our little voting, I wanted to do fantasy first. So I thought, what better place than the fantasy recommendation video than to have you guys go ahead and submit some of your picks. Of course you can submit a fantasy if you want that to be the very first book that we read, possibly, or you can submit any genre. At this time, we're not limiting to any one sort of genre. Just go ahead and put in books that you guys would love to see us read for our book club. So if you would like to go ahead and submit your picks for the book club, there's a link in the description down below where you can fill out the Google form, as well as a community post on my channel that you can go ahead and click on. It's in 2 places, so it should be easy enough to find. All right, let's go ahead and jump back to Past Emily. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I hope you got some cool things to kind of maybe try to dive deeper in, or even got you thinking about other genres that you're maybe like kind of interested in learning more about or want to see some recommendations. Please let me know in the comments if you would like to see a specific type of these guide videos down below. I will try my best to give you guys some recommendations. But otherwise, again, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!